Hi there, and welcome to the Hidden Pixels podcast, a show highlighting those gaming stories you might have missed on your first playthrough. I'm your host, Sebastian Azaro. On this episode, we're looking at the Fallout universe, a post-apocalyptic wasteland 200 years after nukes flattened the country. Our story zeroes in on the former Boston area, now known as the Commonwealth, and a few of its more grizzled inhabitants. Let's dive in. The Lonely Chapel was always their plan. Well, really it was Lil's plan. She was the one who noticed the 3 guards hidden around the perimeter who wore the same uniform as those at the stockpile. The dilapidated building was only a short walk northeast from the secure facility, but most passersby wouldn't have given it a second glance. Most scavengers and raiders would attempt to breach the front gate either through sheer firepower or sticking to the shadows. And each one of them had failed, falling prey to the automatic turrets and armed guards that refused to give access. But Lil knew better. As their group took a break from their scouting mission, she pointed out to her older sister how suspicious it was that there were always 3 well-armed guards near the chapel, how they owned the same weapons as those at the stockpile, how they half-heartedly attempted to blend into the shadows of the building. The older Tourette sister smiled, running a hand through her short red hair. Lil had done it again. She had found the back door. The time was now to hit those bastards. No more waiting. They were getting into the stockpile tonight. Red Tourette, one of the Commonwealth's most ruthless raiders. With her blood-red hair and no-shit attitude, she was a force to be reckoned with to anyone who crossed her path. Anyone except her sister, that is. The Tourettes were 2 sides of the same coin. Red, with her half-buzzed hair cropped to one side and muscular frame, she was the brash and impulsive one. Lil, on the other hand, had jet-black hair down past her shoulders, was wiry, brainy, and thought through every single choice and outcome before you could even cry for help. Both were worn down by the desolate kill-or-be-killed surroundings, and both would do anything to protect the other. Their group of 12 raiders had been scoping out the federal ration stockpile for weeks, and Lil had finally found a viable way in. Now it was Red's turn to take over. She led the charge through the front door of the chapel, taking on all 3 guards with 6 men at her back. When the room was finally silent, 3 dead stockpile guards lay on the ground, and Red was breathing heavy. The first step was completed, and now it was time to take the rest. She led her team down the wooden hatch, through the hollowed-out winding tunnels, and right into the basement of the facility. Lil's back door worked, and what ensued was a one-sided massacre. Fueled by Red's intensity, all that was left in the end were bloody stumps of the old guard littered across the floor. Well, and also rooms upon rooms of non-perishable foods. Cans upon cans of beans and soups and waters, a bounty unrivaled in the Commonwealth that could support a group for years on end. And now it was all theirs. Red looked up from the blood-stained concrete floor and saw Lil's frame enter the doorway, shotgun almost too large in her hands. They locked eyes and smiled, both knowing what this meant. Expansion. Lil said it with a grin as she unfurled a large homemade map across the table. Red raised an eyebrow in surprise, noticing the impressively detailed sketches and annotations scrawled across the sheet. The dimmed lighting in their back tunnel office was just bright enough to make out the labels. There must have been hundreds of points of interest marked. It had only been a month since they took over the place, but Lil's scouting crew had already done some serious work. Once again, Red was impressed by her little sister. She leaned over the map, not knowing where to start, but Lil pushed her back. "Here, let me explain." Pulling out a knife, Lil started her makeshift post-apocalyptic PowerPoint presentation. "Here's us, sis, at the stockpile. Here's the Lonely Chapel to the northwest, and here's Walden's Pond in the northeast. And then to the south of us, not much. The old Arcject building is mostly empty, and past that is more empty land until you hit Tower Tom and the brewery across the river. I guess what I'm saying is, we have a lot of territory for the taking if we want to make a move. A shadow flickered over Red's proud smile. She knew they were doing well, recruiting a bit and even fended off a couple strong scavenger attacks. But expansion? I don't know, Lil. You really think we're ready for that kind of move? Lil seemed at the ready for this kind of weak debate. Yup, the time is now. We have one of the most secure setups around, numbers growing by the day, and there's tons of empty space with no one guarding it. I say we start with ArcJet. Set up another post there, spread around some of our risk. No one's guarding it, and there seems to be a lot of good tech there. We could completely refurbish our arsenal. Red still had her doubts as she leaned back, but Lil had never steered them wrong before. Well, if you think so, I guess we could start by scouting it a little more. Lil beamed and headed for the door. My team's already gearing up. See you in a few. Three days later, Lil's scouting team returned, full of promises of an empty facility and enough tech to upgrade their guns and make them rich. It was that last part that won Red over. If they couldn't use the shit that they found, at least they'd be able to sell it to some scrapper out there. Maybe this wasn't such a risky plan after all. Oh, and there's this one last thing. Lil motioned for Red to follow her to the front gate, where she surprisingly had two strange men bound and gagged on their knees, surrounded by the primary entrance guard. Dirt and blood smeared across their panicked faces. Red looked at her sister with confusion. What? Another pair of scavengers trying to assault the stockpile? Red lowered her weapon, strutted over to one, and yanked the gag out of his mouth. So you really thought you could have fucking taken this place down on your own? Just the two of you? You must think you're fucking superheroes, huh? Before the man could answer, the guard closest to Red nudged her with his elbow. Hey, boss, they weren't storming the gates. We found them snooping just over the hill. Some sort of spies or scouting mission or something. Fury bubbled in Red as she spun on the spot. Spies? Oh yeah? Who the fuck are you spying for, huh? She quickly yanked her pistol out of its holster and clubbed it against the man's jaw. Then, pointing it at his partner's temple, she asked again, Who are you spying for? The man spit a mixture of blood and teeth before he spoke. We're not spying. We're starving. We're from the brewery nearby. We just need food. We're starving over there. His tone may have been sympathetic, but Red knew a con man when she saw one. Blood was rushing in her ears when she hit the man again. Lil stepped up, pulling her sister back while whispering in her ear. The brewery is run by Tower Tom. Trust me, no way would he send his people to beg. They must be sizing us up. Red stepped toward the prisoner again, a calm anger fueling her movements. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. You tell Tom that if he wants food, he has to come here himself and beg for it. I want to see him fucking grovel on his hands and knees. He needs to earn his keep if he's going to get a fucking crumb from us. Now get the fuck out and give him my message. The men started to get up, but Red stopped them. No. You only need one to deliver a message. She fired a round through the partner's temple while laughing, drunk with the power of having others at her mercy. Send them off, boys. They won't be coming back anytime soon. It turned out that Tom did come back soon, much sooner than either of the Tourette sisters could have predicted. Within 48 hours, there were 2 loud explosions, and every single person in Red's squad was racing towards the front gate. Red rushed for the entrance, but was sidetracked by 2 of Tom's men who somehow snuck in. A few short bursts from her combat rifle did them in, but then 3 more rounded the corner. Red was pinned down and separated from the main focus of the fighting. Every time she tried to get a shot off, she was met with a shower of bullets and skidding metal shards. Fuck this, she thought to herself as she reached for a frag grenade at her hip, bouncing the bomb down the hall and then cowering for cover. The explosion shook the entire facility, but the waves of gunfire finally stopped. She charged to where the men were, but all she found were various pieces of them strewn about. So much for a tough fight. She careened towards the entrance, but by the time she got there, her team already had Tom and his gang on the run. Red surveyed the chaos. Her guard was pulling itself back together, winded but not wholly defeated. This attack wasn't the same as a couple of scraggling scavengers. This was war that Tom had started, and she'd need to be better prepared for the next attack. She looked around for Lil, but didn't see her among the guard. In fact, she didn't see her anywhere among her regrouping people. Panic leaked into her senses as she flew from room to room, but no Lil. She ran back to the entrance, but no one had seen her. "You three!" she screamed, pointing to the three closest people to her. "Survey the entire area, 3-mile radius around the whole goddamn facility. Do not come back until you are certain that Lil is not within that area. Do you fucking understand me?" She didn't even look for their responses. Lil had to be lost or something. Red couldn't allow herself to consider the most likely scenario. She was too smart for that. No way he got her. He couldn't have. He just couldn't have. That place was a goddamn fortress. They were lucky to have made it out alive, let alone come back with hostages. Tom shook his head as he stood up, taking a swig of Peabody Pilsner. He paced the room of his office, trying to understand where he went wrong. Half his crew gone. Fuck! It didn't make any sense. The stockpile had been well protected with the turrets, but it was undermanned. Well, it seemed like it was undermanned. Those fucking bugs kept burrowing out of every hole. Recounting it all just made his skin crawl. Or maybe he was just drunk. Fuck it, he couldn't even tell anymore. The door to his office swung open, and Dreg stood there, wondering if he was interrupting. "Hey, boss, they're ready for you." Tom chugged the rest of his beer and smashed the bottle against the wall. At least they got hostages. Dreg and Hook did well in that regard. Maybe they can trade them for some snack cakes or beans or something. He dragged himself down the stairs, stomach growling as he looked over the 4 hostages kneeling in the center of the room. Burlap sacks covered their faces, and their arms were tied behind their backs. Time for a little payback. Without saying anything, Tom nodded and the sacks were removed. He wanted to see the fear in their eyes. He gave them all a once-over, smiling at the thought of every disgusting thing he was about to... Wait, what the hell? He strode over to the leftmost captive and grabbed her by the jaw, forcing her to look him dead in the eye. It is her! He recognized that smug look anywhere, even if it is bruised and battered. It's Lily fucking Tourette. Tom did a slight victory dance, pumping his fists and choosing to ignore the snickers from his team. Fuck yes! They were saved. No way that bitch Red could turn down demands for food when they had her fucking sister. They were going to feast. Tom slightly regained his composure and turned to Hook. Take those 3 down to the crates and lock them up. We'll ransom them first. As for Lily fucking Tourette, chain her in my office, and then bring back the cases of the good stuff. We're fucking celebrating this milestone. This is it, boys and girls. This is where we start our comeback. Tom awoke on his back, his throat dried and crusted and his head banging. They had been celebrating for nearly a week now, and there was no slowing down anytime soon. After he forced Lily to write a letter to Red, demanding food for his people, they had been rolling in the canned goods. He turned onto his back and smiled in the slumbering darkness. In a few days, they'd be partied out, and then the real planning would begin. It would be time to recruit and make their mark in the Commonwealth. Maybe start with that fucker Jared at Corvega, or that psycho Bosco at DB Tech. Neither could stop them now that... What was that? Tom hazily opened one of his eyes at the sound of a metallic scraping from across the room. Lily had been chained in the corner all week, so maybe it was just her stirring. In the dark, he could make out her wiry frame huddled in the corner. But as soon as he lifted himself up onto one elbow to get a better look, she was on the move, coming straight for him at full speed. Fuck! Tom rolled an arm under his pillow, grabbing his ever-present pistol, turned and fired. The explosion of blood and tissue rained over the room as the rest of Lily's body slumped to the floor. Missing half her head, she twitched once before falling still for good. Tom sat there, now panicked and his mind wide awake and racing. Fuck! I thought I chained her good to the floor. What the fuck? I was aiming for her leg. Fuck! Their meal ticket! All gone! Motherfucker! He stood up and took a deep breath, checking to make sure that nobody was coming to investigate the shot. Luckily, gunfire was one of the most common white noises in the Commonwealth. He picked up the remains of the body and dumped it in the corner. Shaking his head, he grabbed a dirty rag and began to clean the room, unsure of what the morning would bring. Those morons would believe anything. Tom was pretty proud of his plan, immediately sending the entire crew into the wilderness first thing in the morning. Rumor had it that there was a fat caravan traveling nearby just ripe for the taking. Funny enough, it was Tom who started that rumor. He grinned as he dragged Lily's remains down the stairs from his office, able to work in the open with the brewery empty. The crew knew the facility pretty well, so Tom knew that there was only one place where she wouldn't be found. It was nasty, even for him, but he couldn't risk the heat he'd get if they found out that he killed their ticket to the promised land. He took a breath and then climbed the ladder up to the beer vat. Knocking the lid off, he wondered how this might affect the taste as he tipped the body into the murky beer below. No time to sample the goods yet. He needed to find a pen and start writing. Red needed to hear from her sister, and he needed to make it sound good. Red squinted her eyes as she scanned the horizon in the early morning sun. She had already been up for hours, not being able to sleep well, knowing that Lil was out there somewhere. She held her hand to shade her eyes, hoping to pick out some sort of figure in the distance, but all that she could make out were the dilapidated buildings and dust. She tore her gaze away and back to the crumpled letter. It had arrived days ago, saying that Lil was safe, but captured by Tower Tom. "Don't give them a thing, sis. I'll find a way out of here." Of course Lil would outsmart those fuckers, but Red couldn't take any chances. She had sent a smaller shipment of food to Tom's drop point, after allowing the dogs to mark it, of course. But there had been no response since. Hours had turned to days, and still no response, and still no Lil. Red's impatient pacing worsened. Her insomnia plagued her as night after night she worried about her younger sister. And then, right when she was about to get the gang to give in and storm the brewery, a second letter arrived. Relief poured over Red as she ripped it from her scout's hand, but that relief turned to confusion, and then anger. The letter was addressed to Red, but Lil had never called her that in her life. In fact, she was the only person who knew how deeply Red hated the nickname. There was a tone of frantic pleading in the letter that wasn't Lil's voice at all. And then it was signed with her full name, Lily. Red crumpled the paper and became lost in thought. Something was wrong, and she needed to find out what happened. She had wanted to attack Tom directly before, but her gang talked her out of it. They said that Lil would be killed on the spot, and they were right. Tom was a ruthless bastard like that. But there had to be another way. What would Lil do? Outsmart them, that's what. Each member either awaiting their barking orders or trying to avoid her stare. Red pointed at the man closest to her. "You!" He gulped, but he held her gaze. "Congrats! You've just become the newest member of Tower Tom's crew." The waiting was the worst part. Lonely nights trying and failing to consume enough drugs and alcohol to keep the thoughts of Lil away. Red was worried she was losing it. She needed to get Lil back. 2 days after she sent her men to be recruited by Tom, she received another letter. Again, it was clearly not from Lil, and again Red's thoughts went to 100 different reasons as to why her sister wasn't the one writing. And most of them were confirmed when her inside man returned that night. He got in with the new recruits of Tom's crew and scoured the brewery, but there was no sign of Lil anywhere. Fuck! That means Tom must have moved her, right? Or she escaped. Maybe she escaped and is just lost. Either way, she needed more scouts. Red quickly got moving, and within 20 minutes, half of the gang was sent out in all directions to find Lil. If she wasn't at the brewery, she was somewhere in between there and the stockpile. They just had to try harder. Keep fucking pushing! Red wanted to join them, but the gang made her stay back. She had been skittish due to the drugs and lack of sleep. She could see them watching her carefully out of the corners of their eyes, as though she might go off at a moment's notice. She paced the facility, waiting for any news, for any scouts to return. She was impatient. She was scared. She didn't notice the scout running quickly down the hillside in front of the facility until they were only 20 or so feet out. She ran to meet them, heart racing at the sight of their ecstatic grin. They got him. The man was giddy but out of breath. They got all of them. Someone went in and killed Tom and his entire crew. It's fucking disgusting, but they're all dead. And Lil? The man shook his head. No Lil among the bodies. It's like you said, they moved her or she escaped. Now we just gotta find her. Red patted him on the shoulder and walked off without saying another word. Tom was dead and Lil was still gone. Thank fucking God she wasn't there when the shit went down. Now there was nothing to stop them. Red gave one last look at the bloody sun on the horizon. We'll find you, sis, wherever you are. The Fallout universe happens to hold some of my favorite stories, and not just in video games, but of all forms of entertainment. The reason I find this series so gripping is that there are tiny hints of tragic tales found on computer terminals and dirty scrawled notes throughout the game world. Many players who go through the main story of Fallout 4 won't learn of Red or Lil or Tom. Their tale is told in various non-essential locations hidden throughout the game. A resourceful player might find Red still alive at the stockpile, or Tom hanging out at the brewery. They may read Lil's notes and Red's computer journal, but none of that is necessary to complete the game. None of it is even pointed out to the players. It's one tale of loss buried in a game full of loneliness and longing for the past, for a time before the bombs fell, where sisters could just be sisters. Going forward on the podcast, I hope to spread stories like this, those hidden on a tablet or a database or a dusty book that most players would bypass in favor of moving the story forward. Today's gaming world is dominated by endless role-playing games, entire universes with enough content to be played literally for years on end. Unfortunately, stories like this one will be the collateral damage, as fewer and fewer players experience them. I want to shine a light on Red and Lil and all the other lost stories, for gamers and story lovers to appreciate. And lastly, I want to give recognition and appreciation to the story writers and the game developers who make these stories possible, no matter how hidden they may be. Today's show was written, recorded, and produced by me, Sebastian Azaro. All sources today can be found in the episode details and at our website, hiddenpixelspodcast.com. If you like what you heard, or even if you didn't, please subscribe, rate, and review. And follow us on Facebook at Hidden Pixels Podcast and on Twitter at Hidden Pixels Pod. And of course, thanks for listening.